The funeral procession rolled silently through Maple Grove, headlights cutting through the morning mist, until two men in fake police uniforms slammed it to a halt, shouting orders and handing out citations. Grief turned to fury as a community's sacred farewell was shattered. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. David's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white beneath the dark leather. The morning sun had barely broken through the mist when the procession began, a somber line of vehicles creeping slowly down Maple Grove's quiet streets. Each car's headlights pierced the morning haze, a silent salute to Robert Miller's memory. The air was thick with the kind of grief that weighs on your chest and blurs your vision, an ache that no words could soothe. David had meticulously planned this moment for weeks, honoring his father's final request to be driven through the neighborhoods where he had made a difference, the roads he had walked, the homes he had protected in spirit. It was meant to be a peaceful farewell, a community's last tribute to a man who had given everything without complaint. The convoy moved deliberately, a thread of black and gray weaving through the orderly streets. Behind David, cars bore the quiet faces of his mother, his sister Amy, longtime friends of Robert's, neighbors who had grown up alongside the family. The solemnity of the procession seemed to suspend time itself until they reached the edge of Oak Ridge Estates, a gated community with manicured lawns and pristine houses that looked more like postcard dreams than real homes. That's where the procession came to an abrupt halt. Two men stepped forward, clad in uniforms that looked official at a glance. Dark navy shirts, tactical belts, and badges glinting in the weak sunlight. But the badges weren't state-issued. They belonged to the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association's private security force, a group notorious in Maple Grove for enforcing the HOA's stringent, often petty, rules with a heavy hand. David's stomach churned as the men raised a bullhorn and barked orders, their voices cutting through the reverent silence like jagged glass. "Stop the procession," the lead man commanded, his tone flat but authoritarian. "This is unauthorized use of the streets. You are violating traffic laws and the HOA's regulations. Vehicles must disperse. Citations will be issued." David's heart hammered in his chest. This was madness. How could a group of self-appointed enforcers think they had the right to disrupt a funeral procession? The mourners exchanged bewildered glances, their pain suddenly marred by confusion and outrage. David rolled down his window, voice steady despite the tremor inside. "This is a funeral procession, a moment of respect for a man who served his country and community. You have no right to interfere." The lead man stepped closer, his smile thin and unyielding. "We maintain order here, sir. Our job is to keep the community safe and ensure all traffic laws are followed. You're obstructing the road." David's mind raced, piecing together the implications. The Oak Ridge HOA's security had long been a thorn in the side of Maple Grove's residents, issuing fines for minor infractions like lawn care or parking. Their authority never questioned because it was private property enforcement, but now they were wielding their supposed power like badges of real police officers. It was a show of force, intimidation dressed up as law enforcement, designed to exert control beyond their legal reach. Around him, the procession's mood shifted from grief to simmering anger. Amy's voice cracked as she whispered, "How can they be this cruel at a funeral?" David's jaw clenched. He felt the weight of every memory with his father, the long talks about integrity, the sacrifices Robert made on the battlefield and at home. This wasn't just about a ticket. It was about disrespect, about stripping dignity from the man who had given so much. These men weren't motivated by safety or order. They were driven by a desire to assert dominance, to remind the community who was in charge. And they had chosen the wrong moment, the wrong people, to do it. As the first citation was handed out, the crowd's shock deepened, but so did their resolve. David's eyes burned with a growing fire, not just for his father, but for the principle of justice. This farce of authority couldn't go unanswered. The procession, meant to honor a lifetime of sacrifice, had become a battleground for something much larger: respect, truth, and the fight against petty tyranny cloaked in fake badges. The news of the Oak Ridge Estate's funeral incident exploded through Maple Grove with the force of a thunderclap, fracturing the town's fragile peace. Social media buzzed with sharp condemnation, neighbors whispered heatedly on doorsteps, and the local diners' worn booths filled with hushed conversations about the audacity of the fake cops who dared to disrupt a man's final farewell. At the center of the storm stood Carl Evans, the petty and vindictive head of the HOA security team, a man whose bitterness simmered just beneath his thinly veiled professionalism. Formerly a low-level security guard, Carl had clawed his way into a position of disproportionate influence by wielding the HOA's rulebook like a cudgel. His grudge against anyone who challenged his authority was no secret. His thin skin was as notorious as his temper. Carl's justification was transparently self-serving. To him, every citation issued, no matter how absurd the timing or circumstance, was a reaffirmation of his dominion. That he had chosen a funeral procession to display his control was both a cruel joke and a calculated display of power. The idea of honoring a Vietnam veteran, a man who had fought for freedom and dignity, was lost on Carl. Instead, he saw an opportunity to send a message. No one could defy Oak Ridge Estate's rules, not even in death. David's transformation was swift and unrelenting. The initial numbness of loss hardened into a burning resolve that edged on fury. How dare these charlatans tarnish his father's memory? How dare they brand themselves with counterfeit badges and wield authority they had never earned? The betrayal felt personal, as if the very fabric of justice had been torn. He became the reluctant leader of a growing resistance, fueled by the community's shared sense of outrage. Calls for accountability spread like wildfire. Maple Grove's residents, many of whom had quietly suffered under Oak Ridge's heavy-handed rule, found a voice in David's righteous indignation. He convened a meeting with the local police chief, a pragmatic man who listened carefully but treaded cautiously around jurisdictional boundaries. City officials, too, were drawn into the vortex, their offices inundated with emails and petitions demanding an investigation into Carl and his minions. The pushback was immediate and fierce. Carl refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down, escalating his tactics with a brazen campaign of intimidation. He ramped up citation patrols and uploaded videos to the HOA's social media pages, showing himself brandishing his fake badge and delivering his own twisted narrative of law enforcement. His videos were laced with mocking sneers and condescending commentary, a public spectacle meant to belittle the town's growing dissent. David's fury crystallized into a meticulous, focused campaign against corruption masquerading as order. He collected testimonies from witnesses, mothers clutching their children, elderly neighbors stunned into silence, friends who had stood silently in the procession only to be harassed afterward. He gathered evidence, photographs of the fake badges, recorded conversations, video footage that exposed Carl's charade. Each piece of proof was a nail in the coffin of Carl's illusion of authority. David also reached out to the local press, framing the story not as a petty HOA dispute, but as a fight for justice and respect, a battle against an oppressive force disguised as protection. The emotional toll was immense. Every small victory was tinged with exhaustion and frustration. Hope flared when a citation was dismissed, or when a council member voiced concern, only to be extinguished by Carl's relentless counterattacks. The community's support was a lifeline for David, but the pressure mounted with every day. The fight was not just legal or political, it was profoundly personal. It was a war waged in the shadow of grief, a clash of ideals, respect for the fallen versus the cold, arbitrary exercise of power. With every encounter, David's resolve deepened, sharpened by the knowledge that this battle was about more than just his father's funeral. It was about reclaiming dignity from those who would trample it underfoot. The evening air hung heavy with a charged stillness, as if the very atmosphere in Maple Grove had been holding its breath, waiting for the scales to tip. When the real police officers finally rolled into Oak Ridge Estates, their presence was a quiet yet undeniable assertion of true authority, a stark contrast to the sham enforcement that had so recently cast a shadow over the town. The procession of cruisers parked with purposeful calm outside the ornate gates, sending a clear message that the facade of power wielded by Carl Evans and his makeshift force was about to be dismantled. Inside the gated enclave, tension rippled through the ranks of the HOA security crew. Carl's usual swagger faltered as uniformed officers approached with measured steps, their badges gleaming under the waning sunlight. The moment of reckoning was undeniable. The counterfeit badges Carl brandished, symbols of a twisted ambition and false bravado, were taken from his trembling hands and examined with clinical scrutiny. The officers, trained to recognize legitimacy and deceit alike, declared them unequivocally fake. The citations Carl had issued, once held as grim threats to the townspeople's wallets and freedom, were summarily voided, ripped from the bureaucratic system like worthless scraps of paper. Carl and his cronies were immediately stripped of their self-assumed authority. The facade crumbled with brutal finality as officers read them their rights, charges of impersonation, and harassment laid out like undeniable verdicts. The weight of their deception settled over them, a crushing burden born of insecurity and a desperate, misguided need for control. Carl's motives, petty grievances wrapped in the guise of community safety, were now exposed for the hollow, toxic ambitions they truly were. Outside, David stood among the gathered residents, the glow of justice washing over him like a long-awaited sunrise. The crowd, once shrouded in sorrow and confusion, erupted in a collective roar of relief and triumph. The communal pain that had bound them now blossomed into shared victory. This was more than a legal win. It was the reclamation of dignity, the restoration of respect stolen from them on a day that should have been solemn and sacred. David's chest swelled with an emotion too complex for simple words, a fierce satisfaction tempered by lingering grief, a peace carved from the chaos of conflict. Every look in the crowd, every congratulatory nod and embrace, affirmed that the fight had transcended personal loss. It had become a beacon for Maple Grove itself, a town that refused to bow to arbitrary tyranny, that demanded honor in the face of cruelty. David's father's memory was no longer just a quiet legacy marked by a single procession. It was etched into the fabric of the community's collective conscience. The man who had sacrificed everything for his country and family had inspired a resistance that shone far brighter than any badge, real or counterfeit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets now freed from false authority, David allowed himself a moment of reflection. The bitterness of loss remained, but it was now tempered with closure. His battle was not just about punishment. It was about justice served, about reclaiming what had been desecrated. Carl's downfall was a testament to the truth that no mask of power, no matter how brazen, can withstand the light of courage and integrity. The story that had begun in grief ended with the promise of resilience. When evil tries to steal dignity, when control is wielded without conscience, it is courage and truth that ultimately prevail. And in that truth, David found a solemn peace, a final tribute worthy of his father's legacy.